"No, do look at me like that," said the Apache. The cowboy couldn't stop staring and made her his wife. The wind whispered softly through the tall grasses, carrying the distant sounds of birds settling in for the night. On the edge of a small Apache village, Ahioka moved quietly, her bare feet brushing against the earth as she gathered herbs along the riverbank. Her dark hair shone in the fading sunlight, and her eyes, sharp and alert, reflected a mixture of strength and curiosity. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, every glance careful, as if the land itself had taught her to notice everything. The rustle of a small animal, the way the water flowed around the rocks, the way the shadows lengthened in the evening. Ahioka had grown up learning the ways of her people. From a young age, she had been taught the importance of courage, of patience, and of respect for all living things. Her mother had often told her, strength comes not just from the body, but from the mind and the heart. Those words had become a quiet mantra in her life, guiding her through every challenge. She knew the plains were beautiful, but they were also unpredictable. One wrong step, one careless moment, and danger could appear without warning. She trusted the land, and the land trusted her. That evening, as she bent over to pluck a handful of sage, she noticed movement at the far side of the river. At first she thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but as her eyes focused, she saw a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a hat that shaded most of his face. He moved with confidence, though there was a certain unfamiliar awkwardness in the way he adjusted the strap of his pack. Ahioka's heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from curiosity. Outsiders were rare in these parts, and she had been taught to be cautious. Yet something about the way he looked around, as if he were trying to understand the land rather than conquer it, caught her attention. The man noticed her almost at the same moment. Their eyes met across the riverbank, and Ahioka felt a strange sensation, a mix of caution and something she could not yet name. She stepped back instinctively, whispering under her breath, "No, don't look at me like that." She expected him to look away, as most strangers did. But he did not. Instead, his gaze lingered, steady and unthreatening, almost respectful. There was a calmness in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement that he was not there to harm her or her people. The man approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance. I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice careful and polite. There was an accent in his speech, soft but different from what Ahioka had heard before. "My name is Daniel," he added, as if introducing himself formally to someone of importance, which, in her eyes, she most certainly was. Ahioka studied him closely. He did not carry weapons openly, and his movements were deliberate, as if he were aware of the traditions and dangers of the land. "I am Ahioka," she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. She did not lower her gaze, but she remained cautious. "Why are you here?" she asked, not out of rudeness but out of necessity. Strangers could bring trouble, and her people had seen enough to know that curiosity alone could be dangerous. Daniel smiled faintly, sensing the careful barrier she had put up. "I've come to work," he said simply. "I heard there is a ranch nearby, and I can help with the cattle and horses. I mean no harm to your people or your home." His words were honest, and Ahioka could feel the truth in them. There was a sincerity in the way he spoke, a quiet strength that seemed to mirror the land itself. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two worlds colliding silently. Ahioka noticed the way the sunlight glinted off the edges of his hat, the way his hands rested calmly at his sides, the slight hesitation in his posture that betrayed a mix of respect and nervousness. She felt a pull she could not explain, a strange curiosity that mingled with her caution. Something about him made her want to study him further to see if he truly was as sincere as he seemed. Finally, she nodded, a small, cautious gesture. "Very well," she said. "You may follow me to the village, but do not stray. My people will watch you closely." Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken rules. He followed her at a respectful distance, careful not to intrude on her space. As they walked, the wind carried the scent of sage and earth, mingling with the faint smell of leather and the faint smoke of distant fires. The world seemed to hold its breath around them, as if even nature itself was curious about this meeting. Ahioka spoke little, but each word was measured. "You must understand our ways," she said. "We live with the land, not against it. We respect it, and it will protect us if we honor it. You cannot simply take from it or expect it to bend to your will." Daniel listened intently, nodding with understanding. He could feel the weight of her words, the depth of her connection to the land, and he realized that this was not just a place, but a life, a way of being that demanded respect, patience, and courage. By the time they reached the village, the sky had darkened, stars beginning to pierce the twilight. The village was quiet, smoke curling from a few chimneys as families prepared their evening meals. Ahioka led Daniel to a small clearing and signaled for him to wait. Within moments, a few villagers appeared, their eyes cautious, curious, and protective. Ahioka introduced Daniel, speaking of his purpose and intentions. The villagers exchanged murmurs, some skeptical, others simply curious. Daniel bowed slightly, showing respect to the elders, and spoke with calm honesty. Ahioka watched closely, observing how her people reacted. Trust was not given lightly, and she knew that any mistake could ruin this fragile beginning. Yet she also saw that Daniel's demeanor did not waver. There was a steadiness in him, a quiet strength that suggested he could adapt, learn, and perhaps even belong. She felt a flicker of hope, though she reminded herself not to be too hasty. That night, as the village settled into quiet routines, Ahioka found a spot by the riverbank to sit alone. She reflected on the day, on the man who had dared to meet her gaze without fear, without mockery, without arrogance. There was something compelling about him, something that made her heart beat faster and yet feel strangely calm. She knew that trust would take time, and that the plains were not forgiving to those who were careless. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a thought that felt almost dangerous. Perhaps not all outsiders brought harm. Perhaps some could bring understanding, respect, even friendship. The stars reflected in the river's surface, and Ahioka whispered softly to herself, "We shall see." The wind carried her words into the night, and somewhere nearby, Daniel listened, understanding that the journey ahead would not be easy, but perhaps worth every step. In that quiet moment, two lives had touched across a river, two hearts had glimpsed each other across the plains, and a story had begun that neither of them could have anticipated. The days after Daniel's arrival were filled with cautious observation and quiet curiosity. Ahioka watched him from a distance at first, noting the way he moved among the villagers, the care with which he handled even the simplest tasks. He carried water from the river, helped repair fences, and guided the animals with patience. Nothing he did seemed rushed, and nothing seemed careless. The villagers, though initially skeptical, began to notice that he had a sincere respect for their way of life. Children would peek at him from behind doorways, and elders would exchange thoughtful glances. Slowly, the presence of an outsider who did no harm became a curious addition rather than a threat. Ahioka herself remained cautious. She spent her mornings gathering herbs and her afternoons teaching younger girls the ways of the land, how to track animals, how to recognize which plants could heal and which could harm, and how to move quietly so that even the smallest creatures might pass without noticing. Daniel often followed her from a distance, sometimes helping with heavy bundles or carrying supplies. At first, Ahioka barely acknowledged him, keeping her words brief and her gaze wary. But over time, she began to notice the subtle ways he learned from her. He would mimic her movements, watch the way she examined leaves, and ask questions that showed genuine interest, not idle curiosity. One afternoon, as they sat by the river repairing a small fishing net, Daniel spoke softly. "I never realized how much skill it takes to live with the land," he said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Back home, I thought I knew hard work, but this is different. Every action has meaning, every choice matters." Ahioka glanced at him briefly, her eyes narrowing slightly. She was not used to outsiders who could recognize the depth of her people's knowledge. Many had come before, with their eyes only on what they could take. Daniel's words, however, carried honesty, and it intrigued her. "You must understand," she said carefully, "the land is not just something to use. It is alive. It listens, it responds, and it remembers. To live here, you must respect it, or it will show you its power." Daniel nodded solemnly, taking her words to heart. There was a seriousness in his expression that made Ahioka feel a spark of trust, though she was careful not to let herself hope too much. Trust, she knew, was earned slowly, and the world had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. Over the next several weeks, the bond between them grew in subtle ways. They shared moments of silence, simply watching the sun rise over the plains, listening to the distant calls of birds, or tracking the movement of deer across the horizon. In those quiet hours, Daniel learned to move with patience, to notice details that most people overlooked, and to appreciate the rhythm of nature. Ahioka, in turn, began to see not just a man, but a person who could respect and learn, someone who might, in time, belong to their world without threatening it. One day, while repairing a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, Daniel paused and looked over at Ahioka. "I never knew how much work this all takes," he said with a tired smile, "but I also never knew it could feel right, like this is where I'm supposed to be." Ahioka didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him carefully, noticing the way his hands were calloused but gentle, the way his eyes were clear and sincere. Slowly, she allowed herself to relax slightly. Perhaps, she thought, not all outsiders were the same. Perhaps some could bring understanding rather than trouble. Despite the growing connection, there were still challenges. Some villagers were wary, whispering among themselves about the newcomer and the possibility of friendship with an outsider. Ahioka could hear the quiet skepticism, and it reminded her to remain vigilant. She could not allow herself or her people to be vulnerable to someone who might betray their trust. Daniel noticed the tension, too, and made careful efforts to show respect without overstepping boundaries. He offered to help elders with their daily chores, to bring firewood, and to assist with tasks that required strength. Slowly, the villagers began to see his sincerity, though acceptance was still tentative. As the days passed, Ahioka found herself noticing small details about Daniel that made her heart flutter in ways she didn't fully understand. The way he smiled when he successfully guided a stubborn horse, the way he listened intently when someone spoke, the way he never mocked or dismissed the traditions of her people. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet patience that reminded her of the land itself, enduring, resilient, and dependable. She began to wonder if her initial caution could be softened, if perhaps there was room for connection in her carefully guarded heart. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, Daniel asked if he could accompany her on a walk through the hills. Ahioka hesitated but finally nodded, feeling a small thrill at the idea of his presence. They moved slowly, side by side, listening to the rustle of the grasses and the distant calls of wolves. Daniel spoke about his life before the plains, the farm he had grown up on, the lessons he had learned from his parents, the dreams he had once held. Ahioka listened carefully, noting the humility in his words, the honesty in his tone. She realized that he was not simply a man seeking adventure or profit. He was someone searching for meaning, for purpose, and perhaps for belonging. Ahioka, in turn, shared small pieces of her world, stories of her ancestors, the importance of the seasons, the way her people celebrated life and honored the spirits of the land. She spoke cautiously, not revealing everything at once, but enough to show Daniel the depth of her culture and the responsibility that came with being part of it. Daniel listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and demonstrating respect at every turn. For Ahioka, it was a revelation to meet someone who not only listened but sought to understand, someone who could step into her world without diminishing it. As the sun set and the shadows grew long, they returned to the village. Ahioka felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. She had allowed herself to share part of her world, and he had accepted it without judgment. It was a small victory, but an important one. Trust, she realized, could grow in careful steps, and perhaps, in time, something deeper could blossom. That night, as Ahioka lay on the riverbank under a blanket of stars, she reflected on the days that had passed. She thought of Daniel's patience, his respect, and the quiet way he had begun to become part of their lives. She could not deny the growing warmth in her heart, though she reminded herself not to rush. The plains had taught her to wait, to watch, and to act with care. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle sound of the river, and whispered softly, "We shall see what tomorrow brings." And tomorrow, the world would continue its quiet rhythm, with two lives moving cautiously closer, learning from each other, and discovering that friendship, trust, and perhaps even love could grow in the most unexpected of places. Daniel had become more than a stranger. He had become a part of the land's rhythm, a presence that respected the past while gently stepping into the present. For Ahioka, it was a beginning, a delicate, careful opening of her heart to the possibility of something she had never dared to imagine. Spring had arrived on the plains, and with it came both beauty and challenge. The snow had melted, leaving the land alive with the green of new grass and the scent of wildflowers. Rivers swelled with melted snow, and the air was filled with the songs of birds returning from their winter migration. For Ahioka, these days were a mixture of hard work and quiet reflection. She and Daniel had grown closer, though she still kept her heart guarded, careful not to let herself fully trust him too soon. Their friendship, however, had become stronger than anyone in the village could have expected, and even the skeptics were beginning to soften toward the young cowboy. One morning, a messenger arrived at the village with news that shook the peaceful rhythm of life. A harsh winter had left a nearby town struggling, and supplies were scarce. Villagers whispered in worry, realizing that their own stores of food might not last through the season. Some elders feared that the approaching months could bring hardship, and the responsibility of survival weighed heavily on everyone. Ahioka's father, a respected leader in the village, gathered a group to discuss a plan. They would need to send someone to fetch supplies from a distant town, a journey that could be dangerous even in good weather. Daniel volunteered immediately. "I can ride to the town," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I know the terrain and I can travel fast. I'll bring back what we need." Ahioka's eyes widened in concern. The journey would take him across rugged land, through unpredictable weather, and past areas where wild animals roamed. "It is dangerous," she warned. "You may face storms, injuries, or worse." "Why do you risk this for us?" Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I want to help your people, not just be here without purpose." His words carried a quiet courage that made Ahioka's heart tighten. She could sense that he truly meant what he said. The village elders reluctantly agreed. They trusted Daniel, but their caution remained. Ahioka packed small supplies for him, dried herbs, healing salves, and guidance on which paths were safest. Daniel nodded gratefully, carefully storing each item. He looked at Ahioka for a moment, sensing her worry. "I will return," he promised. "Trust me." She wanted to protest, to hold him back, but she recognized the determination in his eyes. There was no stopping him. The morning Daniel set out was crisp and clear, with sunlight glinting off the river and casting long shadows over the plains. Ahioka and a few villagers gathered to watch him leave, their hearts heavy with concern. Daniel mounted his horse with skill, adjusting the pack, and waved once before riding off toward the horizon. Ahioka felt a mix of fear and admiration. She admired his courage, but she could not deny the gnawing worry that something might go wrong. Days passed slowly. Ahioka busied herself with village chores, but her thoughts constantly returned to Daniel. Every distant sound of hooves made her heart jump. Every gust of wind seemed to carry his presence. She found herself hoping silently that he would return safely, knowing that the journey was fraught with danger. She also began to recognize how deeply she cared for him, though she kept this realization locked carefully in her heart. Trusting someone completely was never easy, and the plains had taught her to value caution above all else. Meanwhile, Daniel faced the challenges of the journey with determination. The trails were rough, often muddy from melting snow. He had to navigate rivers swollen with runoff, climb steep hills, and avoid patches of quicksand that could trap both horse and rider. At night, he camped under the stars, listening to the distant howls of wolves and the rustling of deer. Despite the hardships, he remained focused on his mission. Each mile he traveled, he thought of the village of Ahioka and of the people who relied on him. The thought of returning safely with supplies gave him strength to push forward, even when fatigue weighed heavily on his body. On the third day, as he neared the town, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Rain poured in sheets, turning the earth into slippery mud. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by deafening cracks of thunder. Daniel urged his horse forward, carefully guiding it across the treacherous terrain. At one point, a flash of lightning revealed a fallen tree across the path. Without hesitation, Daniel dismounted, worked quickly to remove the obstacle, and helped his horse safely over it. His determination never wavered, though exhaustion threatened to overtake him. Back in the village, Ahioka sensed the storm from afar. The wind howled through the trees and rain lashed the riverbanks. She worried for Daniel, feeling helpless as the storm raged on. She walked along the river's edge, speaking softly to herself, "Be safe. Please come back." Her prayers were quiet but heartfelt, a connection she felt across the distance, a hope that their bond would carry him through the dangers. By the fourth day, Daniel had reached the town. The people there were struggling, as the messenger had warned. He carefully negotiated for food, medicine, and other essentials, explaining the urgency of the situation without asking for unnecessary favors. The townspeople, impressed by his sincerity and courage, provided more than he expected. Daniel worked quickly, loading supplies onto his horse, and prepared for the long journey back. Despite the storm, he knew that returning safely was more important than rushing. Every step, every mile, mattered not just for survival, but for the trust placed in him by Ahioka and her people. The return journey was equally difficult. The storm had damaged parts of the trail, and the rivers were even more swollen. Daniel guided his horse carefully, taking extra precautions to avoid danger. Along the way, he encountered wild animals, but he moved quietly, using his knowledge and patience to ensure he and his horse remained safe. Each night he camped under the stars, reflecting on the importance of courage, determination, and responsibility. He thought of Ahioka and the trust she had placed in him, and that thought gave him strength beyond what he believed possible. When Daniel finally approached the village, he was exhausted but triumphant. The villagers ran to meet him, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Ahioka was among them, her heart pounding as she saw him emerge from the horizon, the storm cloud still lingering behind him. He rode steadily toward her, the supplies secured, and dismounted carefully. "You made it," she whispered, rushing forward. He smiled, though fatigue weighed on him. "I promised I would," he replied simply. His calm courage, his determination, and his respect for her people had earned him a place in their hearts. The villagers cheered, not just for the supplies but for Daniel's bravery. Ahioka felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and something deeper stirring within her. She realized that this journey had shown her not only his courage but the strength of his character. He was not just an outsider. He had proven himself to be a man of integrity, someone who could be trusted not just in times of peace, but in moments of danger. That evening, as the village gathered to sort and store the supplies, Ahioka stood quietly, watching Daniel work. She noticed the way he moved with care, speaking kindly to the villagers, offering assistance wherever it was needed. There was a humility in his actions, a recognition that he was part of something larger than himself. In that moment, Ahioka allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps, she thought, courage and kindness could exist in the same heart. Perhaps, in time, that heart could belong not just to a stranger, but to someone she could trust deeply. As night fell, Ahioka and Daniel sat by the riverbank, the water reflecting the moonlight. They spoke little at first, letting the quiet speak for them. Finally, Ahioka broke the silence. "You were brave," she said softly, "not just in facing the storm, but in coming here and choosing to help us." Daniel looked at her, his tired eyes meeting hers. "I did what I had to do," he replied, "but I also did it because I wanted to. Because your people, this land, they deserve respect, and I want to honor that." Ahioka felt a warmth in her chest, a recognition of the depth of his sincerity. That night, as they parted, both carried a quiet understanding. Daniel had proven himself not just through words, but through actions. Ahioka had witnessed his courage, his patience, and his respect. And somewhere deep inside, she felt the first real stirrings of something more than friendship. A possibility that trust, respect, and love could grow even in a world full of uncertainty and danger. The plains, with all their beauty and challenge, had tested them both, and in doing so, had begun to weave their lives together in ways neither had fully imagined. The warmth of spring had settled over the plains, turning the land into a patchwork of greens and golds. Flowers blossomed along the riverbanks, birds sang cheerfully in the trees, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and wild herbs. Life had returned to a rhythm, but for Ahioka and Daniel, something deeper was beginning to stir. The shared moments of work, quiet conversation, and mutual respect had grown into something neither of them could ignore. Yet, Ahioka still held her heart with caution. Trust had to be earned slowly, and the memory of past disappointments reminded her not to rush into feelings too easily. Daniel, too, had felt the change. He noticed the small things, the way Ahioka's eyes softened when she smiled, the way her laughter rang lightly across the plains, the care with which she tended to every living thing around her. He had learned much about courage and patience on his journey to the town and back, but now he was learning something more, the slow, delicate art of earning someone's heart. He admired her strength, her wisdom, and her connection to the land, and he knew that he could not rush or demand her affection. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over the river, Daniel suggested a walk through the hills. Ahioka hesitated for a moment but finally agreed. The hills offered a view of the plains that was breathtaking, the river winding like a silver ribbon, the village a small cluster of life in the vast landscape, and the horizon stretching endlessly. They walked in silence at first, listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the grass. Each step was careful and deliberate, a shared rhythm that spoke more than words ever could. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and earnest. "Ahioka, I have never met anyone like you. Your strength, your wisdom, the way you live with the land, it inspires me. I don't want to take anything from you or your people. I only wish to share my life with you if you will allow me." Ahioka paused, considering his words. She had heard declarations before, empty promises that faded with time. But in Daniel's eyes, she saw honesty, a depth that went beyond words, a sincerity that touched something in her heart. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with the precision she had learned from the land. "You speak of sharing a life, but life here is not easy. It is full of challenges, of responsibility, and of tradition. To live among us, to be truly part of this world, is not something to take lightly." Daniel nodded. "I understand. I am willing to learn, to respect, and to honor your ways. I am not asking for anything more than the chance to be beside you, to support you, and to grow together." His words were humble, yet filled with resolve, and Ahioka felt a warmth she had not allowed herself to feel before. Over the following days, their bond grew stronger in subtle, meaningful ways. They worked side by side in the fields, planting seeds and tending the animals. Daniel carefully observed Ahioka's instructions, asking questions only when necessary and always showing respect. In turn, Ahioka began to allow herself small gestures of trust, a shared laugh at a clumsy moment, a quiet conversation beneath the stars, a gentle touch on a shoulder when encouragement was needed. Each moment built upon the last, creating a bridge of understanding and affection between them. Yet, the world around them was not without its challenges. Some villagers still whispered, questioning whether an outsider could truly belong, and whether such closeness was appropriate. Ahioka knew she had to balance her feelings with her duty to her people. Daniel understood this as well, never pushing, never forcing, always showing patience and respect. Their love, if it could be called that yet, was growing quietly, like a fragile plant nurtured in careful hands, awaiting the right time to bloom fully. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of red and gold, Daniel led Ahioka to a secluded spot by the river. The water glimmered, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and the air was filled with the gentle chirping of evening birds. Daniel knelt on one knee, placing a small bundle in front of her. Inside were flowers he had gathered from the hills, tied carefully with a strip of cloth. "Ahioka," he said softly, "I do not wish to rush or demand your heart. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are true. If you will allow me, I would be honored to walk beside you for the rest of our lives." Ahioka's heart pounded. She had never imagined that an outsider could speak with such honesty and humility. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of recognition. Here was a man who had proven his courage, his respect, and his sincerity time and time again. She felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of fear, hope, and longing. After a long pause, she knelt beside him and took his hand. "I cannot promise that the path will be easy," she said quietly, "but I see the truth in your heart. I will walk with you if you are willing to honor my world as you have honored yourself." Daniel's face lit up with a gentle smile, and he took her hand firmly, feeling the warmth and strength in her grip. They sat together by the river, sharing stories, dreams, and quiet moments of reflection. Their love was not spoken loudly or declared for the world to hear. It was built in shared labor, in respect, in understanding, and in the willingness to face challenges together. In those moments, the boundaries that had once separated them, of culture, of tradition, of fear, began to dissolve, replaced by trust, affection, and the beginnings of a deeper bond. In the days that followed, Ahioka and Daniel began to plan a life together. They spoke of ways to honor both her people's traditions and the skills he had learned as a cowboy. They envisioned a home where both worlds could coexist, a place where respect for the land and care for the people would guide their every action. Daniel learned the rituals and ceremonies of her people, participating with humility and interest. Ahioka, in turn, shared the practical knowledge he had brought, teaching him how to manage the animals, repair equipment, and navigate the plains efficiently. Together, they were building more than a relationship. They were creating a partnership, one grounded in love, respect, and shared purpose. Not everyone understood or accepted their growing closeness immediately. Some villagers remained cautious, unsure if such a bond could truly work. But as days turned into weeks, even the skeptics began to see that Daniel was not a threat but a support. He did not impose, he did not take, and he did not seek to change their world. Instead, he adapted, learned, and contributed. His love for Ahioka was evident not just in words, but in actions, in every chore completed, every thoughtful gesture, every moment of patience. One afternoon, as they walked together through a field of wildflowers, Ahioka reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the first moment she had met Daniel, with his steady gaze and respectful manners, to the long days of work, learning, and shared stories, she realized that her heart had changed in ways she could not have predicted. Love, she understood now, was not about grand declarations or sudden passion. It was about trust, courage, respect, and the willingness to grow together, even when the path was uncertain. Daniel, walking beside her, felt the same. He had arrived as a stranger, an outsider unsure of his place. Yet through patience, action, and a willingness to understand, he had found not only acceptance but love. He knew that their journey would not always be easy, that challenges would continue to arise, but he was ready to face them, not alone, but together with Ahioka. Their bond was no longer tentative. It was a shared strength, a foundation upon which they could build a future. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Ahioka and Daniel sat by the river, holding hands and watching the water flow. They spoke quietly of their hopes and dreams, of the life they wanted to create together. In the gentle rustle of the wind through the grasses, in the distant call of birds returning to their nests, and in the steady rhythm of the river, they felt a sense of peace and connection. For Ahioka, it was a moment of surrender, not to fear or uncertainty, but to the recognition that love could exist even across boundaries of culture and tradition. For Daniel, it was a moment of fulfillment, knowing that his actions, patience, and respect had earned a place not just in her life, but in her heart. Together, they began a new chapter, one of shared dreams, mutual respect, and the quiet, enduring strength of love that defied the odds. The plains had grown warmer with the arrival of summer, and life in the village had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and lively. Children ran barefoot through the fields, laughing and chasing each other under the sun. Women and elders tended to crops, while men guided the animals and maintained the fences. Amid this lively backdrop, Ahioka and Daniel had found a place for themselves, a quiet space in which love, respect, and partnership could flourish. Their bond, built over months of trust, patience, and shared hardship, had deepened into something both strong and tender, and the villagers could see the change in the way they moved together, the way they spoke, and the way they cared. Their home was modest, built near the river with materials gathered from the land. The structure blended seamlessly into the environment, sturdy wooden walls, a roof of thatched reeds, and windows that opened to the soft light of the plains. Ahioka had woven blankets and curtains with intricate patterns passed down from her ancestors, while Daniel had helped construct shelves and a small stable for their animals. Every corner of their home reflected a balance of their worlds, the traditions of her people and the practical skills he had learned as a cowboy. Living together, they had discovered not only love, but the quiet joy of building something meaningful with their own hands. The mornings were often the busiest time. Daniel would help gather water from the river and feed the animals while Ahioka prepared herbs, tended small gardens, and instructed young girls in the village about the land's secrets. The work was shared equally, though Daniel often marveled at Ahioka's efficiency, her knowledge, and her deep connection to the rhythms of life around her. He respected the way she guided others, and she appreciated the care and humility he brought to every task. Together they moved like two parts of a single system, each complementing the other, each learning from the other. One day, as they walked through the hills gathering wild herbs, Daniel paused and looked at Ahioka. "Do you ever think about the future?" he asked quietly. Ahioka considered the question, glancing at the horizon where the sky met the plains in endless blue. "I think about it often," she said. "But the future is like the river, it flows, sometimes gently, sometimes with force, and we must learn to navigate it carefully. We cannot control everything, but we can guide our path with thought and care." Daniel smiled, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Then let us navigate it together," he said. "Side by side with respect, courage, and care." Ahioka nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her heart. It was more than words. It was a promise of shared life, shared responsibility, and shared love. Over time, their partnership became a model for the village. Villagers who had once been skeptical began to see the strength of their bond and the value it brought to the community. Daniel's respect for the traditions, his willingness to learn, and his genuine care for the people and the land earned him acceptance and even admiration. Ahioka's trust in him grew, and she found herself sharing not just work and guidance, but her dreams and fears, her joys and memories. Together, they created a space where love and respect coexisted with duty and tradition, showing that unity could thrive even in the face of cultural boundaries. As the seasons passed, Ahioka and Daniel faced challenges, but they faced them together. Harsh winds blew across the plains, threatening crops and animals. Droughts tested their resourcefulness, and unexpected illness forced them to rely on their knowledge and each other. Each trial strengthened their bond, teaching them patience, resilience, and the importance of mutual support. Where one faltered, the other provided strength. Where one doubted, the other offered reassurance. Their love was no longer tentative. It had become an anchor, a steady force capable of withstanding life's unpredictable storms. Children of the village often gathered around them, fascinated by the partnership they saw in action. Daniel taught some of the boys how to care for the animals, repair fences, and navigate the plains safely. Ahioka instructed the girls in the ways of herbs, healing, and the traditions of their ancestors. The children observed how respect and trust could coexist with strength and courage. In seeing Daniel and Ahioka together, they learned that differences could be bridges rather than barriers, that love could grow not despite tradition, but alongside it. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, Ahioka and Daniel sat together by the riverbank. The water reflected the sky, turning it into a ribbon of shimmering color. Daniel took her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength in her grip. "We have come a long way," he said softly. "I never imagined that life could be like this, full of challenge, full of joy, full of meaning. And I never imagined that I could find someone like you to share it with." Ahioka leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Neither did I," she whispered. "But here we are together, and that is enough for now. Together, we can face anything." Their life together became a story of quiet triumph. It was not marked by grand celebrations or dramatic gestures, but by the everyday acts of love, respect, and shared responsibility. They learned to laugh together, to comfort each other in sorrow, and to celebrate small victories. Each day brought new lessons, and each day reinforced their partnership. Love, they realized, was not just a feeling. It was an action, a choice, and a commitment to honor each other and the world they shared. As years passed, their home grew richer not only in the skills and labor they contributed, but in the life that blossomed around them. Children came, and they nurtured them with the same values that had guided their own lives: courage, respect, patience, and the importance of community. The village, once cautious of an outsider, now accepted Daniel fully as one of their own, recognizing the strength of his heart and the depth of his commitment. Ahioka and Daniel had become a living example of what could happen when two hearts, from different worlds, met with understanding, respect, and love. Even in the quiet moments, their connection remained profound. Early mornings were spent walking by the river, sharing thoughts and plans. Late nights were filled with storytelling, laughter, and reflections on the day's work. Each glance, each gesture, each small act of care was a reinforcement of the bond they had forged. The plains, which had once seemed vast and sometimes lonely, now held the warmth of shared life, a home not just of shelter but of heart. In their later years, Ahioka and Daniel often sat together on the riverbank, watching the sun set over the endless horizon. They spoke of the journey that had brought them together, from the first cautious glance, through the hardships of storms and uncertainty, to the quiet triumph of building a life side by side. They marveled at the ways they had grown, individually and together, and felt gratitude for every challenge that had tested their patience, courage, and love. The village flourished around them, shaped subtly by their presence and example. Young couples learned the importance of patience and respect. Children grew with an understanding that trust and love required both action and care. And Ahioka and Daniel continued to walk their path together, hand in hand, facing life with courage, kindness, and a bond that had been forged through trials, nurtured through understanding, and strengthened by love. Even as their hair grew silver and their steps slowed, their hearts remained strong, tied together by years of shared life and unwavering devotion. Their love had not been sudden or dramatic, but slow, deliberate, and enduring. It had grown alongside respect, patience, and understanding, creating a foundation that neither time nor hardship could shake. The plains, once a place of challenge and uncertainty, had become a home, a place of unity, love, and lasting partnership. And in that life they had built together, Ahioka and Daniel understood a truth deeper than words. Love was not simply about feelings, but about respect, trust, courage, and commitment. They had found in each other not only a partner, but a reflection of their own strength, values, and hopes. Through the long days, the storms, the labor, and the quiet moments of reflection, they had proven that hearts willing to understand and honor one another could overcome any boundary, bridge any gap, and create a life full of meaning, beauty, and enduring love.